On the build-up to E3, there was a lot of talk from Bloomberg around the idea of a 4K Switch and its announcement being imminent. Well, E3 came and went. That didn't happen. And then eventually we had the OLED Switch revealed, which did release on Friday and has done pretty well in terms of sales. We'll go over some of the sales numbers tomorrow in Newswave. However, we did not get a Switch 4K system revealed, released, any of that. The OLED model still uses that same X1 chip. But it does appear that more rumors have been popping up, and there was even an entire video that Nate posted the other day going over some information he's been gathering around this other Switch, a 4K Switch, potentially a next-gen Switch. And I wanted to go over some of the points here, specifically one that could bring up a pretty big issue as we head into that generation. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure that like button helps out a ton. And if new here to the Spawn Wave Plus channel, make sure you subscribe down below. So this would still be rumor territory. I figured I would throw it up on the Spawn Wave Plus channel so we could kind of go over it here. But I will leave that entire video linked down below. Nate the Hate and MVG went over some of these points and the information he's been able to gather. The biggest thing here is Nintendo did deny the idea of there being 4K development kits already out there. For larger companies, I would assume places like Ubisoft, for example, would have something like this. Partners with Nintendo that would be working to essentially enhance their games and prepare them for a next-gen or 4K-enabled Switch. And they're all going to say they don't have it because they're under NDA. Zynga was strangely named in that Bloomberg report, and they said they don't have it. They worded it as if Nintendo did not provide it to them, which, sure, a partner who licensed or contracted out could have provided, who got it from Nintendo. There are ways to get around these claims if you put out a statement in the media. You can word it just right to where you are not lying to the press or the public, but you are intentionally muddying up the statement and what they are asking in that way. But the biggest thing here is, yes, it does appear that some developers and studios have access to a dev kit that is allowing them to prepare games in 4K. So it sounds like whatever Switch this would be, whether it's a enhanced Pro model or a next-gen Switch, it appears that that label is still unclear because it comes down to how Nintendo would look to market this system. Because according to Nate, we'd be looking towards a late 2022 or early 2023 release for this system. And it kind of makes sense considering Nintendo is not locked into that holiday release. They kind of have been recently for like the Switch Lite and then the Switch OLED, but for the initial release of the Switch, it was in March. And I mean, March 2023 would be 6 years. That's usually when you would start thinking about introducing the next generation for your platform. But the issue Nintendo's running into with the Switch is twofold. One, there is that chip shortage that I'm sure is making it very difficult in the background just to secure the parts in order to create a whole new line of system here. The other thing is the Switch is still extremely popular. We just talked about the OLED. I mean, it's selling out in Japan to the point where they're using a lottery system in order to decide who even is allowed to buy this system. And I feel like it's not going to get much easier to create a regular Switch, an OLED, and a Switch Lite if they're also looking to create a whole other Switch a year from now. So it is something Nintendo is trying to navigate currently, just getting the parts to build it. And the fact that the Switch is still popular means that Nintendo isn't necessarily in a rush to go out there and say, well, we have to move on. Like, they were in that situation with the Wii U because the Wii U lost momentum almost immediately. Like, after the first year, it was pretty obvious Nintendo was going to have a rough generation with that platform, but not necessarily with the Switch. It hasn't really lost a ton of momentum. Now, it does appear that sales were starting to kind of waver a little bit there, but that could also have to do with supply constraints. And with the OLED now seemingly revitalizing the sales charts for the Switch, I mean, I figure Nintendo is looking at saying, well, we could probably get another couple years out of the current Switch platform and then look to move on, or at least start to move people over to this new platform that would probably still leverage that Switch name. And the idea of 4K for the Switch isn't out of the realm of possibility, considering it appears that they would approach that with some sort of upscaling technique. DLSS is named. Nate has mentioned that several times now on this channel, even on the podcast that we do Saturday nights. It's been a constant thing that's been brought up. I have wondered if that's just a method they're using for now with these dev kits, and Nintendo and Nvidia may come up with their own proprietary upscaling technique specific to the platform, but as of now, at least according to Nate, that is what they're leveraging currently while they are creating these games. So that'd be kind of cool to see Nvidia and Nintendo get together and implement DLSS for a console like the next Switch, especially if, we assume it's still going to be a hybrid, since that's what's really selling the Switch is its hybrid setup, because it works so well for people, which is one of the reasons I think Nintendo is going to continue with this hybrid concept as they go along for their systems. I don't think they're really going to do a home console as their main platform, or even just a handheld only as their main platform. But there was one thing that was brought up that could be a massive mistake if Nintendo does not work this out as they roll into next generation. That has to do with backwards compatibility. Now, it's been brought up by people who do a lot of data mining with the firmware, like Michael Sayers, that it would not be as simple as, it's all just backwards compatible. Nintendo would have to make a serious effort in order to have most or even all of the games, or even most of them, I should say, backwards compatible with this new platform. I think that's something we all just assume would happen because it makes sense to all of us. And it would be pretty frustrating if they announce this system and it just doesn't have backwards compatibility. You have to rebuy all of the games again. I feel like that would turn some people off even from upgrading, because if you do that, you lose your entire library of Switch titles that you may have been building up over the past couple of years. They have seen an increase in software sales across the board, especially with indie titles on the eShop, and then also their first-party games. We call it the Switch effect for a reason. Now, MVG is obviously very qualified to speak on this, and he does think that there would be ways for Nintendo to essentially create, a tool or ways to patch these games and maybe even extend that to third-party partners and developers, and I would hope also indie developers, in order to get their games over to the new platform, at least prepare them and let them know well in advance, so we don't have this weird situation where we have to figure out if one game's compatible and then the other one isn't, and we go through a whole checklist, and that would be a complete mess. So I hope they would be more in line with how Sony, for example, approached the PS4 backwards compatibility to the PS5, where they did a bunch of testing and they made it eventually work through a profile on the PS5. There were some that didn't work, but it seemed that some of those third-party developers went in, did some patches, and for the most part, they all work now. And then it was also mentioned that there are some games that are currently in development just for this 4K Switch. Yeah, that sounds about right, is what I'll say. I think there are going to be some third-party games that just show up on this newer Switch that wouldn't have really been possible necessarily. They could have been possible, but we could be dealing with some very low frame rates, the Vaseline effect, if you will, on the screen, even for some pretty low resolutions at times to get it working on the current system, whereas with the newer Switch that would be more powerful and also have access to upscaling techniques would look substantially better. The other thing here, though, is would we still see compatibility on the current Switch through the cloud? It's something I've considered, and we've brought it up before. If a game comes out, it's native on the newer Switch, and there's still a way to play it on the older Switch where you have to buy the cloud version, similar to what we've seen with just games like Hitman 3, Control, or even the Kingdom Hearts games being accessible at all. Would there be an option to where, okay, you have purchased this game, you can't play it on your old Switch natively, but you can stream it? Maybe that's something Nintendo looks into along with third parties, and who knows, maybe it's something Nintendo comes up with in collaboration with Microsoft, where they can leverage things like Azure in order to make that work across the board. And I think at this point, I'm just ready for a more powerful Switch. I'm already sold on that hybrid concept. It's just be nice to see Nintendo also work to make the system more capable as we go along here, and whether that is a revision that just adds a bit more to it, or yes, an entire next generation Switch, I think I'm on board with it. It'd be cool to also see what else Nintendo can do with more powerful hardware. If they're able to make something like Breath of the Wild, or as we see Breath of the Wild 2, something as impressive as that work on the Switch, what could they do with more powerful hardware as we go into 2023 or 2024? So exciting stuff there, and I wouldn't be shocked if we start hearing more and more rumors and reports around this 4K Switch as we get into next year and head towards that holiday. But let me know what you guys think about some of this stuff down below. Specifically, though, the backwards compatibility. Would that be a deal breaker for you if Nintendo came out and said, you know what, none of those games are backwards compatible? They've done that before, obviously, with the Wii U, but you're not going to put a Wii U disc in the Switch. That makes sense. But if it's another hybrid system, it looks very similar. Even take the same cartridges, but they say, well, we couldn't make it work. How would you feel about that? Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.